Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carolyn if you're new here, and today I am filming my March wrap-up part 1. For this month I decided to split it into 2 parts, mostly because I don't have the patience to wait a few more weeks to talk about some of these books. I'm just too excited. And I also think that some of them deserve more of their own moment, and I don't want to be like rushing through if I just waited to do one video and I had like a ton of books and the video was 30 minutes long. So we'll see how this goes, and maybe I'll keep it up or maybe I'll go back to doing one video for the whole month. We'll see. But I'm wearing my little Irish sweater because tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. So I thought that in honor of that I would start off with a much beloved Irish novel, and that is Normal People by Sally Rooney. So of course this book took the world by storm when it came out. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize. People absolutely love this book, and I was very interested to read it because as much praise as this book has received, I have also heard a lot of people who really hated this book. So of course this follows Connell and Marianne and kind of their compulsive relationship, and we follow them from their high school years into their young adulthood. So going into this book I was hesitant of 2 things. One being that I've heard a lot of people who had said that they felt alienated from the writing style, that it was bland, that people really complained about the lack of quotation marks. And then the second thing I was worried about going in would be that Rooney would try to make the reader root for a toxic relationship. And as to my first point, I loved the writing of this. I loved the writing style. It was blunt, it was in your face, it took you right there with the characters, there was nothing to hide. I think it made sense for the type of book that it is. So no complaints there, I loved it. I think that's the kind of writing that I tend to really like anyway. And then to the second point, I don't think that Rooney tried to make the reader root for an unhealthy relationship. I think, at least for my own reading of this book, I found that I was just rooting for 2 very complicated, struggling young people to just be okay, and I was just rooting for them as individuals. So a lot of the appeal of this book is kind of like that relatability factor, that people could really relate to kind of this messy, complicated, back and forth relationship that you kind of feel pulled towards, but it might not be the healthiest thing for you. And while I couldn't really relate to that aspect of the book, I could relate to kind of the discussions of mental health, and I think I was so appreciative of how Rooney showed kind of someone's mental health journey and kind of how it ebbs and flows. And I think specifically the depiction of Connell actively seeking help and going to therapy, I think that was so well done. And I think that was something really important to include in this kind of book, to not just make it like this sexy romance, and to really go in and look at these young people and why they're struggling, what's the root of their problems, but how do those kind of interact in their everyday lives. So I really appreciated that. I think that was really well done. And I can just confidently say that I am like on the Rooney train. I am joining the masses. I loved this book. I wasn't really expecting to, honestly. I am not really a romance reader, but again, this wasn't a romance to me. This was just following 2 people trying to figure it out, and kind of using a connection with someone else to help them do that. So I loved this book. I will read everything she writes now. I'm convinced. I'm with you. I'm with you people, okay? And then a very different book that I also really enjoyed, and that is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Reid. So this is a very short book, so I don't want to talk too much about the plot because I don't want to spoil anything, and it's short, so you just got to read it for yourself. All I will say is that it opens up with a new couple. They've only been dating like a few weeks, driving to visit the boyfriend's parents in kind of a remote farm location. And the girlfriend is sitting in the car kind of going over in her head how she plans on ending the relationship and breaking up with him. And she's kind of hyper-analyzing him and their conversations and their interactions in her mind while they're driving. So that's all I'll say about the plot. But what I will say is that this was kind of a work of genius in my opinion. I think what Reid was able to do by making the reader terrified even when seemingly nothing scary was happening, I think was just like brilliance. The unease and it's uncomfortable and it's scary and you're not sure why you're scared, but you are, and like I've never had the experience of having to take breaks from a book, but this is the first time that's happened to me. I mean, Stephen King could never. Like really, I had to like actually put this book down because it freaks me out so much. Even when like they're just having a conversation in the car. So I think that's really impressive that Reid could do that, kind of make that atmosphere that makes you so scared. What I will say for myself, when the end of the book came, I don't know if I was so frazzled or if I just wasn't paying attention or if it was all just happening so fast. I didn't get it. So after reading the ending a few more times and then actually going onto Goodreads and reading the spoiler reviews, I got it. So I don't know if that's like my bad, but then knowing, understanding it, and like, oh yeah, duh, like, okay. And then I go back and I like read moments, I go back in the book, now knowing what I know, it makes the book 10 times more genius. I mean, this book could have really been like the first 75 pages and it still would have been brilliant, like a brilliant short story. But the whole book together, I think, I mean, he did it. He did it. And I loved this. I think I'm really getting into like horror for the first time really ever, but I have a very specific type. Like I really enjoy like the psychological, unease, uncomfortable type of horror. I think this might be something that I really enjoy. It might be a new thing of mine. So this did it perfectly. And then a book that I didn't have as much success with, but I still enjoyed, and that is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. So this follows a young woman named Casey who has just recently lost her mother, who she was very close to, in kind of a very sudden accident. And she's kind of inundated by student loan debt, and she's a struggling writer, and kind of everything that can go wrong in somebody's life does go wrong here. I mean, like, you name it, it's happening to Casey, and it's kind of one after the next after the next. It's really exhausting. And then there is the kind of love triangle part of this book, where Casey meets two very different men, and they kind of offer her two different paths, two different, almost like ways to heal, ways to move forward. They offer her two very different futures. And then, for me, where this book did its best work was kind of talking about the physical toll that grief and anxiety has on Casey's body. I think that was really, really well done, and like those moments where Casey would have an anxiety attack or would physically feel depleted by her grief and by her stress. I think those were really well written. And kind of this like gaping hole of just missing her mother, I think was really well done. I was less interested in the romance aspect of the book. But again, I enjoyed it. I just think it wasn't all I thought it was going to be, but I liked it. It was kind of like an easy read, which sounds really wrong because so many horrible things are happening to this woman, but it really is just kind of quick, one after the next, and you're just kind of sucked in, and then all of a sudden you're done. So I still would recommend it. It was a good book. And then I read a classic, and that's Passing by Nella Larson. So this book has been on my TBR for a very long time, but I specifically wanted to read it in March because Bennet was doing a book club discussion of Passing. I think it's through the New York Times. I'll try to find the information and link it below. It might already have been posted, but I wanted to read this book before watching that. So, of course, this follows a woman named Irene. She's a black woman, and she runs into a kind of a childhood friend of hers named Claire, who she discovers is living as a white woman. She's passing as a white woman. And Claire has kind of married a white husband who doesn't know that she's a black woman, and it's kind of this big secret. So for Irene, learning this, it kind of sets off like a streak of insecurity in her. She's kind of obsessed with learning about Claire. She's horrified by her decision. Very back and forth, complicated relationship that these two women get into. I think that I kind of had a very special reading experience with this because this is my mom's copy. I don't know if you can see all her notes, because she teaches this book in one of her classes. So kind of having all her little notes and highlighted lines really helped me read it and just kind of point out things that I might have just kind of flashed right over. I really enjoyed this book. It was a quick read, like so quick, but I think it had a lot to say. And Claire is kind of interested in Irene for the opposite reasons that Irene's interested in Claire. Claire's kind of missing her roots and missing where she came from and the people she grew up with, and she's kind of lost a part of herself by trying to live this whole other life. So it was a great book. I'm so glad I read it. I think it was about time. And then, again, a very different book, and that is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. So this won the International Booker Prize. So this book follows a woman who all of a sudden starts having these very horrific nightmares, like blood, gore, violence, and very suddenly decides to go vegetarian. and it kind of takes a very extreme progression, and it becomes like a very serious eating disorder, and she becomes very severely anorexic. And this book is so brilliant in the way it was structured and the way it was written, because of course this book is about bodily autonomy, and it really is a feminist novel, obviously in the most extreme of cases of this woman choosing to stop eating, to take back control of her body and her mind, and kind of rid herself of this male dominance that's kind of always oppressed her. But more than that, I think, because that's so much of what the book is saying, kind of under the surface, the way the book is written is we're never seeing from that woman's perspective. We're hearing from her husband, her sister, her brother-in-law, her parents, as they're kind of watching her physically deteriorate, and they're all trying to exert their will over her and force her to eat meat and force her to, like, see reason. So I think that's a really impressive way to write a book like this with these types of themes. But also this book is like so layered, it's so complex, that I think there are probably ways to read it that I was just missing. So this is kind of a book that I think you could reread and like analyze in a few different ways. I'm sure of it. But of course there are trigger warnings for this book, of eating disorders, anorexia. It was a really haunting book, really sometimes uncomfortable and terrifying to read, to kind of hear other people's observations of someone's body just kind of breaking down. So it's very dark, but if that's something you're able to read right now, I would recommend it. It was really, really well done, and I'm sure there are things that I just missed. I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing, but I enjoyed what I did get from it. Okay, and I know I said in one of my past videos that I don't often buy new releases or hardbacks because they're like $30, and that's, you know, ridiculous. But when the Women's Prize for Fiction long list was announced a few days ago, in just like a frenzy of excitement, I picked up a few. And I don't regret it, but you don't have to do that. Like, there are libraries, you could buy secondhand, you could wait, you could do lots of things. But for me, one of the best purchases I've made maybe ever is Piranesi by Sussana Clarke. I loved this book. I don't think I'm being dramatic when I say that this is maybe a new all-time favorite of all the books I've read in my life. Yes, but what's it about? Okay, so it is about a man named Piranesi, and he is one of the sole inhabitants of this house, this labyrinth. It's like this is a literary fantasy novel. So Piranesi is kind of in this place with only one other human called the Other, and these two men are working on this kind of secret project. Yes, this secret project. And I think after reading some of the heavier novels of the first half of the month, this was such kind of like a breath of fresh air, and this was honestly a joy to read, I think specifically because of Piranesi as a character. I mean, he's so genuine, he's so lovable, he's so endearing, he's so curious, he's so trusting. He's like everything good that a character or a human could be, Piranesi is. And that was just like so fun to read, and just to read somebody that I really, really loved. But I really don't do often. I usually read kind of very complicated, shady, morally gray characters. So this was a rare occurrence, and I loved it. So one of the other best things about this book is the way that Clarke describes the house, because this house, this labyrinth, these like ancient buildings that Piranesi and the Other inhabit, is the whole world. It's their whole world. And the book is kind of written only from Piranesi's perspective, and every chapter is an entry in his journal. So, and Piranesi kind of lives in awe of his surroundings every single day, and he's always cataloging things, and he's fully aware of the magic around him. So reading from his perspective is just really fun, a fun way to learn about the world. But I also think that there's, like, obviously the mystery elements of this book, and because we're only in Piranesi's mind and in his journal, we only know what he knows, which was really fun, because when he starts to uncover more things and he kind of starts to venture outside of his little safe haven, we kind of learn along with him. So I think this book has the potential to be read as pretentious, but first of all, I don't really mind a little bit of pretension in my literature. That really doesn't bother me. But also I think that the characters and the atmosphere and the physical space of the house were all just perfectly executed, and it really brought you into that world. I have not been immersed in a world that fully in such a long time. After I finished this book, a few people messaged me asking if I've read her other book, that really big one, like Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Mr. Strange and Dr. Norrell, something like that, and they said that that's one of their favorite books, so I will hopefully get to that one. This is a joy to read. I absolutely recommend it. I would read this book 100 times over, and I probably will. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you've read any of these books, please comment below and tell me your thoughts, or if you're just thinking about reading them, I would love to hear what you think. Feel free to subscribe if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you very soon in the next video. Bye everyone!